So our next muscle is going to be our latissimus dorsi. So this one has several origin points. We can turn around to the back to see, and I've removed the lower trap so we can view the whole muscle. So it's originating from T7 to T12, the spinous processes on these vertebrae. It is originating from the thoracolumbar fascia. Okay, so that's the fascia of the lower spine, as well as the crest of the ilium. We can see here the tall wing of the pelvis, the ilium. It's going to originate from there. And we'll turn around and see that it also joins up with the lower ribs. Those are a little easier to see in front, but we can definitely see those attachment points at the ends of the lower ribs, as well as the inferior angle for the scapula. You can see that it also joins with that. So all those origin points and then one simple insertion point on the humerus, which is going to be our intertubercular sulcus. So that's where it's attaching to. And it has several functions. So it will aid in extension, adduction, and internal rotation of the shoulder, which makes sense based on its insertion point and angle, depending on where it pulls from. We notice that it will aid in those shoulder movements. It also has a job in hyperextending the spine. So this allows for activities such as swimming, climbing, and swinging with our arms held high, because it has that insertion point on the humerus. And it'll also adduct or raise the arm against resistance. It also plays a role in expiration of breath, coughing and sneezing. And then it also elevates the pelvis because it does have an insertion point there as well, or an origin point rather. So the innervation for this muscle is going to be the thoracodorsal nerve, which arises from C6, C7, C8 spinal roots. And that sits within the brachial plexus, which we are all familiar with as well. So that's our latissimus dorsi. The next muscle is going to be our levator scapulae. The origin for this is going to come from C1, C2, C3, and C4 transverse processes and posterior tubercles. You can see there. And inferiorly to that, we have an insertion point here at the scapula. So this is our vertebral border of the scapula, which is sitting above the spine. And in particular, it's the superior angle. So this sharp angle right at the top, medial on the scapula. And the function of the levator scapulae is to elevate and adduct or retract the scapula back. It'll also aid in scapular downward rotation. It'll allow for a lateral bending of the cervical spine to the same side. And it'll aid in cervical rotation to the same side, as well as cervical extension, so extending the neck back. And the innervation for this muscle is going to be the C3 and C4 spinal nerves, the ventral rami. That brings us to our next muscle, which will be the rhomboid major. So the rhomboid major originates from T2 to T5, the spinous processes of those vertebrae, as well as its supraspinous ligaments, inserting into that medial border of the scapula, below the spine, and then down to that inferior angle. And so the functions here include scapular adduction or retraction, scapular downward rotation, and scapular elevation. And the innervation here is going to be from the dorsal scapular nerve coming from C5. And our last muscle sits atop the rhomboid major, and that's going to be our rhomboid minor, originating from C7 to T1 spinous processes, and inserting into the vertebral border of the scapula right at the level of the spine. The functions here are the same as the rhomboid major: scapular adduction, scapular downward rotation, and scapular elevation. And the innervation is also the same here, coming from C5, dorsal scapular nerve. So that was my section, a very long one. I hope that was helpful. And as always, let me know if you need any more help or you have any more questions.